Welcome back to Auto Technic, and we have an outstanding video for you guys today. That is because this F430 is going to be undergoing an F1 to manual conversion. Alright, so I am actually pretty excited about today's video because honestly, this is the first car that I've had the chance to perform an F1 conversion on. I've worked on these cars long enough to where I've essentially done each individual component of this conversion separately as a repair or associated with a repair over the years. So there's really not a lot that's new to me, with the exception of the fact that I'm just doing it all at once in the car, and we'll have the satisfaction of driving the car in the shop as an F1 car and driving it out of here as a manual car. So pretty excited about that. And well, before we start talking about the kit that we chose and some of the different configuration and options with the kit, I figure I'll bring you guys up to speed on the car, because you can already see that the car is pretty well disassembled, and there's good reason for that. Now, in my last video on this car, I actually walked you guys through the steps to remove the gearbox. We replaced the clutch, the flywheel, and the throwout bearing, and I really was trying to be as intentional as possible on keeping that video dedicated to the clutch and really trying to isolate anything that was related to the conversion out of that video. However, naturally, there is some overlap there, so there is some items that kind of were talked about in the last video, and well, that's really what I want to cover right now. So, for starters, why is the car disassembled like this? Well, that is because when I had the gearbox out, I had the F1 actuator off, and I just set the actuator back on here so that way it was out of my way. Now, I stopped assembling the car at this point because in order to get the F1 actuator off of the transmission, you really need to have these catalytic converters loose or out of the way. So you can see that they're in here, but they're completely loose. So I just have the bolts up on the header flange started, so that way it's just in place there. So that way I'll be able to work and get this actuator off, and I'll be able to do all the work to the side of the transmission. And once all of that is complete, then I'll come back and reinstall the rest of my exhaust and muffler, and I can get my airbox in. And honestly, that's really all that's left. I need to get the tailpipes on, my bracketry for my exhaust, the muffler, the airbox, my air inlets, and my side panels. And we're going to leave this one off because, well, we are retaining our E-Diff, so we will still need our F1 fluid reservoir, and we will need our pump back there at the back. So I really took this as far as I could on the clutch replacement. And in that video where we did the clutch replacement, I did talk about it a little bit. So if you guys saw that video, you already know. For one, starters, I already talked about it. We're retaining the E-Diff. Secondly, since I had the gearbox out doing the transmission or the clutch, we replaced the throwout bearing, but I replaced all of the seals inside the transmission that are brake fluid compatible. So the throwout bearing is operated on an F1 car with the ATF, or the hydraulic oil that the F1 system runs on. Now, in a factory 6-speed car, the throwout bearing is actually actuated from brake fluid that comes from the brake fluid reservoir, and all of the O-rings and seals that are within that system, and specifically the throwout bearing and behind the throwout bearing flange, are not compatible with brake fluid. So if you switch over from the ATF to the brake fluid and you don't change those seals, everything will eventually leak and it will fail. So there's obviously different mindsets or point of views on what is the best method to do these conversions. Obviously, pulling the transmission and replacing those seals in the throwout bearing adds a expense to the repair because you have to buy the clutch, the flywheel, all the parts. There's a lot more labor to it, but really the client and I both wanted to do this in a manner that kept the car as OEM as we possibly could. So even though this car never came as a gated manual, our goal was to make this as close to factory as we possibly could. Really, in my eyes, doing it the right way. That's also why we're retaining the E-Diff, which I will talk about separately here in a second. That's a whole nother subject. So we've already covered those items, and there's only one other thing that I did back here since I had the gearbox out. And I put the cap on right here for our speed sensor, so since we don't need that. And I've also pulled the hydraulic line off the side of the gearbox. So those are already taken care of. You can see that I still have my hydraulic line here, and my speed sensor was plugged in right there. You can see my connectors here. So I've left all that as is. We'll address all the rest of that in this video. And I'll bring you guys up here, and you can see as for the interior of the car, untouched. I've done nothing with it yet. So we're going to be covering all of that work inside the car, getting the shift tower in, the shifter, shift cables, all of our pedal work, everything up in the front. All of that will be in today's video. So we have a lot to cover. So let's take a second and talk about the kit that we chose to go with. Now, there's several kits on the market, and there's a lot of differences with them, and the client and I discussed all of our options, and we both agreed that the kit that was most appealing to us was the Cambio Manuale kit. And you can see that I have it set out here on the bench, and really my first impression is very positive. I really like the kit a lot, and I'll tell you that one of the reasons why I like this kit is everything is cast, and on the factory cars, that's how they are. These parts are cast aluminum, this piece is cast aluminum, and I really feel that this kit looks very factory. And I know that a lot of the parts, like the shift towers that are fabricated or that are fully CNC'd out of billet, they look amazing, but honestly to me, I don't know, it just looks out of place. It's just, I mean, I guess if it functions well, it makes no difference, right? But I feel that the cast pieces look just more factory, more OEM. So I'm not opposed to making changes to cars and modifying them. I just prefer to do so in a manner where the car still looks factory. And well, the Cambio Manuale kit definitely fits the bill there. Another big thing that I like about this kit is it's all OEM compatible, meaning all of the parts on here, if I were able to find a factory OEM part, I could replace it with their parts. So it's essentially a clone of the factory kit. They retained all the same geometry, all the same parts, and that really makes, I think, serviceability in the long run a lot better because there's more options for parts. Versus if you buy a kit from a company that makes a one-off bespoke part, there's really no guarantee how long that company is going to be around making that part, how long they're going to be in business. So say if you're thinking really long term, you have a problem down the road, you might really struggle to get a part for those kits. On top of that, this kit's price point, it's really hard to argue with. So that was really the deciding factors that we went with on it. And I would say that the experience on dealing with them was fantastic. The only downside of this kit is it does take a while to get. So we had to put in a deposit. There was a waiting list. I had to wait for the kit to get manufactured and get sent to me. I will say that through the entire process, I was kept up to date where we're at. And from when I gave them the deposit and when they told me I'd get the kit and when I got the kit was exactly the same. Nothing changed along the way. They hit their commit date, which was great. And you can see that I really have it all laid out here on the bench. It was all packaged very nicely. And I got to give them credit because everything, let's say all the hardware like this, was zip tied to each component. Like these shims right here are zip tied with red zip ties. I've undone most of them, but they had all of this hardware zip tied to this component. All of this hardware is zip tied to this bracket. Really making it very easy so you just didn't get a bag of hardware. You know what hardware goes with what component, and everything was really just laid out pretty well. And it also came with a PDF document, and the instruction pages, or the PDF for the instructions on this, is 100 pages, and then I think there's like another 50 or 60 page addendum just for the 430. So very comprehensive instructions. I've already kind of combed through them. Like I mentioned, I've already done a lot of this stuff, and I have the benefit of working on these cars and being very experienced with them. So I just kind of look through the instructions to see what's different and kind of give myself a little bit more insight to what we're doing. But I think if it was for somebody that's never done the kit, so far, I think the instructions are pretty comprehensive and help walk you through that pretty well. So really we have our shift actuator here that's going to bolt onto the transmission, and this is really what's going to be doing all of the work. And again, it's a very nice piece. This is our bracketry that goes on the transmission for our shift cables, our hardware, our clips for the cables, some Adele clamps for the cables. We have all of our plugs for our F1 system. We have our Scuderia Swiss TCU delete, so this is what's going to handle all the software in the car. It's going to require a little bit of wiring, but they even gave us our Tessa tape, so that way we can wrap the wiring and make it look nice. So it's all great. We got our clutch line, clutch position sensor, return spring, stop, again more bracketry, our new clutch pedal, clutch master cylinder, shift tower cables, shift trim, and this all came assembled. We have our knob. They gave us a nice little cover for the knob, which is pretty great. So it's really a great kit, and like I mentioned, the only thing that I can think that's missing here now is the cap that we did for our speed sensor. So it's a comprehensive kit. It looks like we have everything we need. And like I mentioned, they have options where you can completely eliminate the E-Diff. They have options where you can, like the one we have, where we can retain the E-Diff. They have options where you can do this, where you can retain the ATF throwout bearing in the car and you don't have to remove the transmission, so that's a different kit. And they also have options where if you choose not to get the software package to take care of your warning lights for your cluster and your NCMs, you can do so. And also the other thing they have is for your brake pedal, which you can see I don't have a brake pedal, and I don't know if I can get you guys in there. We have the F1 brake pedal, which is a lot wider. So they have a couple different options there. I could have given them a deposit. They would have sent me an already cut down brake pedal, and I would have to send them back our brake pedal. But honestly, I just said, don't worry about it. I'll be able to cut the brake pedal down, make it match, and I'll just take care of that while I'm in there. Not a big deal. So it's really a no-cost option to do that, but I chose not to do it because A, I have the tools and equipment here to cut it, and I like doing stuff like that. But I didn't want to deal with the deposit and return shipping and getting a refund. To me, it just didn't seem like it was worth the effort when I have the tools and skill to cut down the pedal. So there's all of our parts laid out, ready to go in. And as we mentioned, this is where we stopped on the car. So really, I think you could start anywhere on this job if you chose. So you could start up into the pedals in the car, doing the clutch master cylinder, doing the pedals under the dash. Obviously, the fun part, satisfying part, is getting the shift tower in, right? We all want to see that. But I kind of going to be smart about this, right? I already have all of this disassembled. So I, one, want to minimize the amount of stuff laying around my shop. So there is some appeal for me to get this fully reassembled. I can then get my exhaust back in. I can get my airbox back in because I can adjust my shift cables from the bottom side. So really, once I have everything on the side of the transmission, I can reassemble the top of this car and really clean up the parts I've sitting around the shop. Furthermore, to do any of the work into the car, I really need to have it off the lift so I can open the doors all the way up. So I'm going to need to take the seats out of the car. Honestly, I'm just going to take the steering wheel off too, take the driver's seat out. That will give me a lot more working space to get under the dash, work on the pedals. I'm going to have the steering wheel off anyways to take the shift paddles off. So really, doing the interior work of the car is going to require the car to be off the lift. Well, the car is already on the lift from our gearbox work, so I'm not going to take it off the lift now, only to put it back on the lift. So it makes no difference on if you start at the front of the car or the back of the car, because at some point you're all going to converge and have it all installed. But for today's video, we're starting back here, and I think where we're going to start is getting this actuator off of the car. All right, so we got the car up in the air, and I think we're just going to jump back here and get started on the removal of our actuator. So we just have it dangling here. You can see that I have one of the old brackets still kind of wedged in there because the lines are preventing me from removing it. And really my game plan here is to get the actuator and the lines removed. Now you can do this from the top side. You can remove this heat shield right here and work up there. But I honestly felt it was a lot easier just to pull the wheel, take the fender liner out, and I'm just going to leave the entire F1 system in place. But I have access to where all my lines go up here on the whole valve body. Now you can see my lines running right up the side, so I'll take this bracket off, and they're all contained in this heat sleeve. We're going to remove those. Now I'm not going to just jump straight to removing these bolts up here because I still have fluid in the entire system, and I want to minimize my mess, especially up here on the car. Although doing it this way, I could take this heat shield off, and there's really not a lot of nooks and cavities for my fluid to kind of leak into and sit and just make a mess down the road. But we're going to be a little bit smarter to minimize that as much as we can. I'm going to take this actuator off. I'm going to hang it down. I'm going to crack all my banjos here loose and just let the system drain. I got my little drain bucket there. And try to get as much fluid out of the lines just using gravity as I can. And then we'll jump up to the top and take the rest of the lines off and just remove the whole system. Now there is one important thing to note, and this isn't so much for doing this conversion, but it's if you're doing any actuator work, is if you just jump in here and whip all the lines off, say if you have to reassemble it, you could really be in a world of hurt, because obviously each line has a specific port it goes to, but your banjo bolts are actually different. So if you see this banjo bolt has a much taller head versus this one over here, it's a lot smaller. The orifices and the inside of the banjo bolts are different depending on the line. So if you're taking an actuator off and you're cracking the lines open down here, it's really important that you're sure that you put the banjo bolt in the correct location and you really know what went where so you can get everything reassembled, because you can end up creating a lot of problems for yourself down the road if you're giving one side of this assembly more flow and pressure than it wants, or less flow and pressure. So to make things a little bit easier, I am going to crack these loose and drain the system, but I'm still going to leave the lines bolted up to the actuator so we know where they go, just in case if anyone ever down the road wants to put this back together. It's help keeping the line in the proper location on the actuator and the banjo bolts. Not totally necessary, but It's easy enough, so that's what we're going to do. And once we get that drained out, we'll come back up here and work on the rest. All right, so we got our actuator hanging. All of my banjo bolts are loose. You can see that we drained out what little fluid was in the lines. And I think it's pretty straightforward from here. It's just these two 10 mils to take this bracket off to get the hoses off. And from there, we're just going to remove each of these lines. And we also have to take this hose off here with this ear clamp. So again, for the ear clamp, I use this hook tool. It's always my go-to. I don't like to cut ear clamps. You can just get a hook tool in there, and you can see you can work it in there, spread them right open like that, and that should allow me to take this line off. I have to twist it to break it free with the nipple, like so. So pretty straightforward. Even though we're not going to be reusing this, that is just my preferred method. I do them all the same way. It's pretty quick and easy. There's no need to cut those off. So, oh, we've got some fluid there. You can see that these all lines drop down to the actuator, and then there's this line right here, which actually goes up and fed to our clutch pressure line on the inside of the car. So that line also needs to come off. And once I get all these lines off, obviously I'll have to come back and clean up what other ATF ends up leaking out. But it's pretty straightforward over here. The kit comes with these plugs, crush washers, so I'm just going to bolt these in to seal off all of those ports. And then a rubber cap for our vent line, I'll put that on, and then zip tie that cap on so it stays in place. And that's really all that we have to take care of back here. So I don't think there's too much that's too exciting and interesting going on with this. So I'm going to get that stuff taken off, get it all configured how it needs to be, and we'll show you what the end result is. Let us get the inner fender back in, everything reassembled back here, and then we can focus to the transmission, where I think we can all agree much more interesting stuff to watch and learn about. All right, that was about as easy and straightforward as it could be. You can see that I have all my plugs in. I have them all torque striped. Now, I will say on torquing these in, really anything with a crush washer, I generally don't follow the torque spec that's there. I go by feel. So with those copper crush washers, you can feel them start to crush and give. So I tighten these down, and then I go just a little bit further until it crushes, and then I stop. I do so because I feel that ultimately making sure that my crush washer is properly crushed is more important than the actual spec, especially on something as simple as a plug here. So you can see that all the lines are out. I reinstalled this bracket here and our overflow hose for the F1 system here for a reservoir, just leaving that down there. And I didn't really cover it, but to pull the inner fenders out, it's just a handful of Phillips head screws. Since this car does have TPS sensors, I did have an extra clip here where I just had to squeeze those two pins in to get this out of the back side of the inner fender and just disconnected the sensor. So it's really straightforward, very easy, and that's why I went this route. And everything is cleaned up. Really, I'm ready to button everything up and put the inner fenders back in. But before we do so, since we have such a great view of this, there's one thing I wanted to talk about, and that's this screw right here. This is a bleed release screw for our accumulator up here. And when we get into bleeding the E-Diff, and once I go to work to set the fluid level, this is a nice little trick, and you can get your hand in there from the top side and release this. So if any of you have done any work on the F1 system and you filled your fluid level and you thought you had it at the right level, and then you came back the next morning and found that it pushed a bunch of fluid out this drain hose and onto the ground, that is because you have this accumulator here, and this accumulator will slowly release pressure, which will then raise the fluid height in the reservoir. Meaning, if you set the fluid level in the reservoir too high, your accumulator, when bleeds out, will push fluid out through this drain hose, out on the ground, and make a big mess. A way to confirm that that's not a problem is you can actually release the pressure from the accumulator right here at this screw, and that'll instantly push all the fluid back into your reservoir, and you can see your max height. So again, I'll show you that once we're going to set the fluid level. I also have a tool that I made based off the factory tool so I can get the fluid level set at the correct height. But I wanted to seize the opportunity and show you guys, because when on the top side, we're not going to be able to see this screw very well. It's going to be really hard to see. And right here, it's right in front of our face. And also, kind of jumping backwards a little bit, but you can see I got that nipple on our old return line there, and everything's taken care of back here. So pretty simple, pretty easy. I'm just going to leave all the solenoids plugged in. It just makes sense to leave them all plugged in right there. Everything as it is. And you can see Our actuator, I did tighten those lines back up where I loosened them to drain the fluid, and I just zip tied my banjo fittings on for each lines so we know which one goes where, and you can see our clutch pressure lines. So I'm going to get all this hardware kind of set off to the side, toss back in our fender liner, toss back on our wheel, and we'll continue on. All right, so the fender liner's back in, the wheel is back on, so we're all buttoned up and pretty much ready to move away from the hydraulics and the F1 part of this conversion. But before we do, I wanted to take a second and really talk about the E-Diff and the options that are there, and really just convey to you guys my experiences that I've had with them. I see a lot of people talking on the internet, just get rid of the E-Diff, it's simpler, you can get rid of all the hydraulics, all the units, you don't have to worry about the failure and the high cost of repair. All right. So to be fair, I can just share with you guys my experience. That doesn't mean that it's accurate across the broad range of cars. But I can tell you that I worked in a dealership for 10 years. I've been working on these cars for 15 years. Off memory, I have not ever replaced a hydraulic or a valve unit on an F1 system. I've never had one fail. I've never had to replace one. I'm not saying that they're not a problem. I'm just sharing with you guys my experience from working on these cars daily. Now, have I seen my fair share of F1 problems? Absolutely. Generally, what are those problems? It's usually air in the system, the bleed screws on the F1 actuator are backing out, maybe some bad potentiometers, a bad centering. Clutch wear and a worn clutch causes a lot of problems. E-Diff wise, the repairs that I've done on E-Diff, I think I've replaced a handful of E-Diff solenoids, a couple pressure sensors. That's really about all that I've done. And that is not just for 430s. That counts for any car with an F1 system. So I can tell you that if we're going to compare to, say, the later transmissions, the dual clutch transmissions, I can't tell you how many of those I've had out and apart, because those always end up needing speed sensors, pressure sensors, they have leaks. Those mechanically are pretty reliable, as in the hard components, but the sensors and the repairs, far more failure prone than the F1 systems, in my personal opinion and from my experience. So I see that as a lot of people using that for justification to get rid of the F1 system, or to get rid of the E-Diff, is because you can have a total elimination of the F1 system. But I don't know if they have a full understanding of what the E-Diff system is, how it operates, and really how advanced it is. And honestly, in my opinion, based on my experience of the lack of failures I've seen with the actual solenoid valve body pump accumulator in a 430, specifically that's controlling the E-Diff, I don't see any advantage to removing the E-Diff. Now, let's talk about the pros, and we're going to get real technical here on the E-Diff. So, first of all, we have everything off, the hydraulic pressure is released from the car, and if I spin this wheel and we watch the other side, that wheel's not moving. That is the indication of an open differential. Now, let's talk about this E-Diff inside the transmission in the limited slip itself. It is a clutch type limited slip, and it has a piston that can vary the pressure on the clutches in the differential. That is the E-Diff. So it's using that hydraulic pressure to apply or release pressure on those clutches, and it can control the lockup from 0 to pretty much full lockup. So it's like an infinitely adjustable limited slip differential. Very cool feature, right? You can see right now that there's no hydraulic pressure on the E-Diff, so this would be the equivalent if we remove the entire E-Diff system out of the car. And you can see that it's an open differential. It's not spinning the other wheel, and the only way we can gain more lockup on those clutches is with hydraulic pressure. So you remove the E-Diff, you're basically having, in my opinion, an open differential. Now, I've seen people claim that you can remove the E-Diff and they do a burnout in the car and it leaves 2 tire marks. Well, I can tell you personally that I've had many cars with an open differential, and if you get enough wheel speed on them and you shock them hard enough, you can get both tires to spin, but it doesn't mean you have a limited slip differential in the car. So I don't take that as full proof that it's still a limited slip. Now, here's where we get real technical with the E-Diff that a lot of people don't realize. There's a lot of logic and really a lot of information that go into the E-Diff ECU that help it determine how much lockup it needs or doesn't need. I'm going to go off memory here on some of the things I can think of that are feeding into it. And all of this information is being fed via sensors that are hardwired to certain ECUs, and then those ECUs share that information over the CAN to the E-Diff. So you have accelerometers on the car. We have accelerometers on the front suspension. It has accelerometers on the body. It's watching the movement of the suspension. That feeds into the E-Diff. It wants to know what the body of the car is doing. It's watching the yaw of the car. So if the car is starting to turn or slide, or it's, you know, the back end's sliding but the front has grip, it's paying attention to that. That's all fed in through the stability control, traction control. It's watching your throttle pedal movement. It's watching your vehicle speed. It's watching your wheel speed from each wheel. It's watching your Manatino setting. Do you have it in sport, race, or wet? That all changes its logic on how it's going to apply and actuate the E-Diff. So knowing that it takes all of that information and all of that feedback and it calculates it, I mean, that's way more capable than anything a human can do, right? That's very fast, very real-time things. It's going to really help out how you're driving the car. Yeah, it's going to make a difference. And obviously, like in wet weather, it's going to loosen the differential up, so it's a lot safer if you're driving the car in wet mode. So that's obviously a lot of information in calculating that E-Diff control unit is using to determine how much to lock up or not lock up that differential. And if we take all of that, which I think that is a pretty cool feature and a lot of processing power that's making those decisions, and I couple that with my own personal experience where I've had an incredibly low failure rate of the E-Diff system on these cars, or I specifically not say E-Diff system, the valve, body, and accumulator and pump. I just have not seen a lot of those fail. I don't see that using the failure rate or supposed failure rate on those items is a justification to get rid of the system. Now, maybe let's say you have one that's failed. Okay, maybe, but I still, in my opinion, think you're leaving yourself with an open diff. So it's my personal preference to retain the E-Diff under all circumstances. Obviously, if I have a customer in here that's really dead set on doing it a different way, I can communicate to them and tell them what I know about the car, how it functions, the logic of the system, what all is at play of the system. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it is their car, it is their decision. But me personally, I like keeping the E-Diff. So that's that. Now that we have that covered, let's drop under the car and start talking about what we need to do to get the shift actuator installed to the transmission. All right, so it's about time to get to the fun stuff, but before we do, we have one more tedious task to take care of, and that's some of the mounting studs that are existing on this F1 gearbox. We need to get them removed so we can install the new hardware. Now, there's a couple that we have to remove no matter what. So there's this upper stud up here where the actuator bolts on. We need to remove that one. Coming down over here, we need to remove these three studs right here at this junction point. This stud up here, so that's where one of the shift cables is going to pivot off of. This is where the lower bracket for the lower pivot of the shift cables bolts onto. And we also need to remove this stud right here because the holder for the cables bolts in through this hole up here and up here. Now, I'm also going to choose to remove this stud. Now, this stud won't be used, and I just don't want it hanging out there, so I think it's going to look a lot nicer if we remove it. And that's where the existing wire was held on for the clutch position sensor, which we have since removed. So this guy's coming off. Also back here, I'm going to remove, actually not this upper stud. We're going to keep this upper stud. I'm going to remove this lower stud. Now these two studs each held on a retaining bracket that held on or positioned the actuator back here at the back. I'm keeping the upper one because there's a small 90-degree bracket that I can bolt back on, and that's going to retain this heat shield that sits over the back of the gearbox so I can reuse it. So we will retain this one. This one needs to go, and also this stud back up there needs to go just because, once again, the actuator's off. We don't need it there, and it's going to look a lot nicer with them gone. Now, to remove the studs, you can double nut them to take them off, but I'm fortunate that I have the tools to remove studs. So I'm just going to use this tooling, pull the studs off. Now, if they prove a little stubborn to get out and they don't want to spin off easily, I will grab my MAP gas torch and heat up the aluminum casing around the stud. Obviously, with the stud being steel, the aluminum around it being aluminum, it's going to absorb the heat a lot quicker, it's going to expand a lot quicker, and that's going to loosen up our tolerance and help the stud pop out. So let's get these studs out of the way so we can start installing those beautiful new parts from Cambio Manuale. All right, with everything prepped, I'm going to start back here on the assembly by installing our bracket that holds the shift cables. So you'll see that it's going to sit right up there like that. And we're going to have a bolt in each retaining spot. So we're just using the hardware that came with the kit. You can see that I put a little bit of blue Loctite on them because we don't want these coming out at all. And we'll just get these ran in loose till all three of them are in and get them torqued. And these ones get torqued to 12 foot-pounds. All right, we're moving back here to this pivot bracket for our linkage. Very straightforward so far. The bracket for the cables is installed, everything's torqued and torque striped. Same thing down here for our lower pivot bracket. It is installed and torque striped. And I did a dry run mock-up of the actuator assembly on the transmission, and I am glad that I did. If I take you guys over here, you see these existing studs, how far they protrude. And we see down here this other stud protrudes a reasonable amount. Get me spun around right there. To where once we put the nut and washer on, it's going to look pretty normal. But since we have such a height discrepancy of the casting here on this versus the F1 actuator, you can see that we have quite a bit of studs sticking out here and up here, and we also have the same thing over here. Now you can see that I have changed that stud so that way it sticks out normally, and this is just one of my OCD traits that I have, that I just think that looks so much better than having that long stud stick out. That just kind of screams that we've been back here and we've changed things around. So you can see that this is the factory stud that I pulled out, and it's shouldered, which limits how far it goes in. And I happen to have these other stainless studs here on hand, and they're actually about the same length, just a hair shorter, but they're not shouldered. And that allowed me to drive that stud in a lot deeper to where I can set the length so it matches the remaining studs. I really like that a lot better. It functionally makes zero difference. It just makes me feel better because it's going to look a lot nicer. It looks more factory, more OEM. So I'm going to pop this off. I'm going to take those other two studs out. I'm going to replace them with some more of the shorter one. I will Loctite these studs. I'll probably red Loctite them. And then I'll use a pair of veneer calipers so I can set the height the same as these other factory studs here. I'll measure this shift actuator and make sure that boss is the same thickness all the way around, but I'll set them all at the same height since they're kind of don't have a dead stop. And once we get that done, then we can get some sealant on this and work to get this installed. So it took just a couple minutes. I got those studs replaced, and that is going to look a million times better when it's finished. And now that we have those done, we can jump over to the actuator, and I have everything cleaned and prepped, and it's ready to go onto the car. We've done our test fit, it fits fine, we fixed our studs. And this actuator currently is sitting in the neutral position. And if you note, on the gearbox, when I parked the car, it's kind of dark up there, but it's sitting in the neutral position as well. Let me give you a light. So we want to make sure that we have the gearbox neutral and the actuator neutral, so we're not putting anything in a bind when we reinstall it. And I will say that the kit does come with a tube of sealant to seal up this actuator to the side of the transmission. However, I am choosing not to use it because, well, I don't want to open another tube of sealant when I already have plenty of tubes of sealant around the shop that are already opened. Now, from the factory, the F1 actuators are sealed with a 3-bond 1211, and this is that white sealant, and I would say this is a kind of a light-duty sealant. It's used in a lot of places on these cars. Specifically, Ferrari uses it on all the paper gaskets. It's used on O-rings. In case in point, it's used for the actuator sealing surface to the transmission. This is a good sealant. I have really nothing against it, although I'll say it's not very resilient to brake clean, and it's not very strong, meaning it's relatively easy to clean off the surface, especially if you hit it with some brake clean. That is kind of one of the keys to that sealant and how I use it, meaning I use that sealant in areas where they're highly serviced or it's removed frequently, so that way when the next person has to go in and do a repair, they're not spending a tremendous amount of time cleaning up the sealant, and it just kind of saves a little bit of time and effort. And it is, like I said, the factory stuff, so where the factory uses it, I try to use it again. So although this is the factory sealant that they use on the gearbox and the actuator, I think we're going to pivot a little bit. And I say so because with this manual actuator, it can be left on the transmission and we can remove the transmission from the car. And really, I don't foresee a lot of need to remove this from the transmission. It's pretty much going to go on and stay on. Now, this would be sufficient. We could put this back on and would be fine, or we could use the sealant that came with the kit. And the sealant that came with the kit was like a Yamabond, which is kind of like I'd say it's a midpoint of the two sealants I have here. However, since I have this open right here, this is my more aggressive sealant that I use, and this is 3-bond 1217H. This is it's a little bit thicker, it's a little bit stronger, it has a stronger bond to the parent metal, and it's more resilient to, say, if I spray it with brake clean. So I do like to use this in certain areas, although I'm not super liberal with it on the cars. Kind of back to what I just mentioned. If I were to go and use that 1217 everywhere, it would really make servicing the car for the next guy a lot more difficult. So it's really overkill. I only use it in a few key areas. Generally, when I know that one component's probably not going to have to come off again, I'll jump over and use the sealant. So I'd say 90% of the time I'm using this stuff. Every now and then I'm going to use this 1217, which I'm going to choose to use for this actuator. I think it's going to be the better choice. I think this actuator is going to be on there long term. It's not going to need to come off, and I want the better, more resilient sealant on there. So I'm going to take a minute and get the sealant applied to the actuator so we can get it installed to the gearbox. So we have our light coat of sealant on the actuator body, and we're ready to get this installed into the car. We'll just work it up and over. There. And grab our mounting hardware. So to get this reinstalled, we'll use all the factory mounting hardware with exception to this one Allen bolt right here, and that's where we left the stud out. And for everything else, we'll just use the hardware we took off. Now I can already tell right there, it's going to look so much better since we switched those studs to the shorter stud. It's going to look uniform. It's going to look intentional. I like it already. So I'm just going to get all the hardware started, and we're going to suck everything in, get it bolted tight, and then we're going to torque this to 7.5 Newton meters. And our last step here is to take the hardware for our pivot. I've already put some blue Loctite on it, and there is a washer here on the bottom side. And this gets installed up here where we removed that stud into the existing hole in the gearbox. So we'll run this in by hand. And then this gets torqued to 12 foot-pounds. And it's going to be the same thing for this hardware here. It's going to go right there. We'll have to take their zip tie off and get our Loctite on and get it torqued in. Make sure they still have free movement. And that actuates nicely. Awesome. Well, everything back here at the gearbox went on very nicely with no interference issues. Everything's torqued up, as always, torque striped, and I gotta say, those shorter studs look so much better. Small detail, no one will ever see it, but I like it, and it makes me happy. But everything's on, and you guys can see that this thing shifts smoothly. I can run through the gears just by hand back here. Works pretty great. Everything fit right up. I had no fitment issues at all. Everything was just, like I said, pretty impressed with this kit so far. It looks very factory. Like I said, it has pretty much the same finish as the transmission on the casting. It just really looks like it's supposed to be here. Sure, it's a little bit shinier, but other than that, It doesn't look out of place. And they do mention it in the instructions, one thing to note, and that's back under here on the gearbox where some of the gearboxes are clearanced for the reverse arm, and that when you install this actuator, you need to be sure that you actually have appropriate clearance back there. Try to get you guys in there so you can see where it's been clearanced. I did nothing to this gearbox. It was already done that way, and when I operate it through the gears, I have plenty of clearance up there to where it's not interfering. But it is definitely one thing that you're going to want to pay attention to and check and make sure that you have all of your travel and you're not hitting. So I think that we have everything really wrapped up back here. There's not much more to do other than hook up the shift cables and the hydraulic line, and that's going to wrap up what we need to do back here at the back of the car. However, there's no point in putting the shift cables in yet or the hydraulic line in yet, because really I'm going to work from the front to the back on those. So hydraulic line, I'm going to work from the master cylinder, then run it to the back of the car. Shift cables, again, the shift tower to the back of the car. So I need to put those components in before I can route the cables and lines to finish everything up here at the back of the car. However, let's say if I go and reassemble the back of the car, I'm still going to have adequate access back here to get my cables on and adjusted where I'm not worrying about my catalytic converter like I was earlier. I have all this installed, and actually, as I'm just talking about it and thinking out loud here, now that I've replaced all these studs with shorter studs, the clearance issue we have with getting this actuator off with the exhaust installed probably won't exist anymore, because I shortened the length of these 3 studs quite a bit. I bet you we can get this off and leave all this assembled, which is a nice little perk for the shorter studs. So, where I'm headed with this is I think I'm just going to set the camera down and I'm really just going to focus on getting the back of this car fully reassembled. So, meaning I'm going to just work to get the tailpipes installed, the muffler, all my bracketry, the airbox, as much trim in the engine bay as I can. I think I have enough time today to finish all of that stuff up. And that's going to allow me to come out here tomorrow, start fresh, and we can start in the interior of the car and start getting the interior out and some of the, fun parts like the shift tower installed. I mean, I don't think there's a lot to cover on the reassembly of the car. Honestly, it's going to be pretty much the exact opposite of the disassembly I did on the car. So if you're interested in seeing those steps and processes, check out the previous video on this car where I disassembled everything to do the clutch. I really did a play-by-play on the removal of those components, the order, the sequence, and get everything apart. So my reassembly is really going to just be a reversal of that process. So I'm going to set you guys down. I am going to take advantage of not filming and get some music cranking in the shop, and I am just going to make some headway on this car. And, well, I'll see you guys back out here tomorrow morning. Morning. What a difference a day makes. Now, yesterday it was pushing 80 degrees, relatively sunny and quite nice. and today we're in the mid 60s and it is rainy outside, quite a bit cooler. But honestly, that's not really a bad thing, and that is because there is a tremendous amount of construction going on outside. You guys might be able to hear some of that noise in the background. It is very distracting for me, so since it's so much cooler, I'm able to actually have the door shut, and really I'm trying to minimize that noise coming in. They're doing a lot of digging, making a lot of noise. I'm going to take advantage of the much cooler day, keep the door shut a little bit so I can keep the noise out of here and focus on what we're doing here on the 430. Now, speaking of the 430, I didn't end up bringing you guys back at the end of the day yesterday. I figured it was going to be better for me to come back, recap what we did in the morning while I was fresh and not exhausted. And, well, as you can see, I hit my goal. I got everything reassembled and the car exactly where I wanted it. Now, I did mention that I was kind of planning on putting the engine bay trims back in, but since I ended up changing so much with the hydraulics over here and the wiring, I really just think it's more prudent of myself to leave everything off for now until I have this conversion fully done, the car up and running, and I make sure there's no leaks, there's no electrical issues, there's no mechanical issues. So we're holding off from there. Those are pretty quick and easy to put on. But other than that, everything is fully reassembled. Now, the only thing that's really worth talking about on the reassembly that is different is our wiring. So you can see right here, I have it all zip tied up and bundled up here. And this is all the wiring that was ran down on the transmission for our potentiometers on the F1 actuator. So since that's all gone, we don't need that anymore. So I just wrapped all that up nicely, zip tied it up here out of the way. I also removed the bracket and the wiring that was here for the clutch position sensor and tucked that over and out of the way. Now, on our reinforcement brace up here, there was a dowel clamps that are securing our O2 sensor wiring on both sides of the rear O2 sensors. And over here on the right side, I ended up taking those clamps off. I'll show you. This is the clamp that was in the car, and you can see the size of it. And it was this large because it had the wiring for the F1 actuator running through it and the O2 sensor. But once I finished removing all of our wiring, it was only the O2 sensor being ran through. So I replaced them with a much smaller and appropriate size dowel clamp. That way, this wiring was held secure and not loose. So again, just a small little detail, not a big deal. You don't have to do it. But it's kind of like the studs on the actuator on the gearbox. It's just one of those things where I think it looks more intentional, more factory, it's more purposeful, and there's no point in having such a large dowel clamp on there when it's not going to do the job that it was meant to do since we removed half of the wiring. So, like I mentioned, everything's sorted up here on top. I will say on the exhaust adjustment, you can't really see because I have the fender covers on, but I really worked to get them centered and equal, and also the depth of the tips really matters. 430 is going to be tricky because any adjustment I make on one tip is going to have an immediate effect and the opposite effect on the other tip if they go up or down. So you really need to spend your time getting them adjusted. I will say that the factory actually has a special tool to adjust the tips where it's a big phenolic block that you slide in here, and it basically centers the tips in the opening and also has stops for the tips and limits the depth of it. And that tooling, you got to be careful with that tooling because it can scratch the paint when you install it in here, so you still have to tape everything up real carefully. But you basically leave all of your exhaust loose, slide that tooling in, then you can start working through all of your adjustments and tightening everything down while checking to make sure your tips stay in position. Obviously, I don't have access to that tooling now, so I just had to go visually on getting the tips centered. And really, I did spend quite a bit of time on it. I probably spent upwards to an hour and a half making sure that that exhaust was centered and really equal side to side and everything was where it needed to be. And I did so by just kind of snugging all the hardware up, getting everything firm and tight. And then I just started working on my vertical adjustment on my hangers, really getting my tips where I wanted to be. And I just started tightening everything down. Once I had everything pretty much where I wanted to, then I jumped up to our catalytic converters to header connection, got those tightened down, and then kind of came back and retightened everything and reworked it. So just patience, take your time, and it's really not too bad to get that taken care of. So the exhaust is on, everything in the engine bay is pretty much sorted, and our hydraulics are all taken care of. So what's next? Where are we going to turn our attention to? Well, I know that installing the shifter and shift tower is going to be the most satisfying and fun part of this project, but I think I'm going to hold off because I think getting the pedals taken care of, that's the least glamorous part of this probably, and the most tedious because it's not that fun working up under the dash. It's going to be a lot easier since I'm going to remove the seat. It'll be a lot more comfortable for myself to get under the dash, but I think for today, our focus is going to be purely dealing with the pedals under the dash, I think I should get that done in pretty good time and order. So maybe we can start moving over to the shift tower at some point today as well. So we can see here, our remaining parts are all laid out and kind of have it all broken down. So really, there's no point in running the cables or the hydraulic lines, in my opinion, until I have the master cylinder in, my pedal in, and also the shift tower, which kind of plays in because I need to get the car off of the lift so I can open the doors all the way up, and that's going to allow me to get in there and get the seats removed, but also have access to work underneath the dash. So essentially, I'm dividing my work up, right? I had the car on the lift. I did what I could with it on the lift here at the back. There's really nothing more I can do to the car with it on the lift. I'm going to get the car off the lift, push it backwards, then I can do my interior work. So with the car off of the lift, it'll be no problem to install my pedal, my master cylinder, my clutch sensor, and obviously we can get the shift tower installed and all that done on the inside. And the cables get fed through from the inside, so I can still do that with the car off the lift. Essentially feed these cables through, and I could probably start routing this cable, but once all this stuff's installed, these cables are in. Then I'll put the car back up on the lift, raise it up, and I won't need access to the inside of the car at all, and then I can finish routing my hydraulic line and my shift cables, make whatever adjustments I need. And electrical, I did jump the gun on that. I'm going to take care of that while it's off the lift. So I guess is what I'm saying is I'm going to roll the car off the lift, we're going to put in the pedal, we're going to put in the shifter, we're going to install the shift cables. I'm going to deal with all the electrical because that's all behind the seats in the back of the car. So before we just push the car off the lift and get started on the pedals, there is actually one thing that we need to do while it's still on the lift. And I'm going to take advantage of using the lift to raise the car up some, only so it's at a better working height. And we're going to work to get this front trunk panel removed. All right, so we got the car up in the air just a little bit, and that's just really so I don't have to bend over so much. It makes it a lot more comfortable to work on the car. There's really nothing too special about removing this front trunk panel. I do remove the tool kit, our tire kit, and I take this relay cover off. It gives me a little bit more access. And we're just going to work to remove all these screws. It's a 4mm Allen all the way around. Now here, it gets a little tight because you don't have a lot of room because this particular car has a CD changer. And one of my favorite tools that I use is this quarter drive snap-on ratchet, but you can see it's a bit driver ratchet, so I can put an Allen bit in there, and its overall height is incredibly low, and it really is nice for taking care of hardware like that. Now, one thing I will mention when you're removing this hardware is a lot of times it runs through the adhesive that holds the vapor barrier on, and it gets very gummy, and it gets gummy on the threads, and it may create a little bit more resistance when you're pulling that hardware out. That's totally normal. It happens all the time. Once I get that hardware out, I will work to get that adhesive off because it really can make it a lot harder to get everything back in and reinstalled. So I'm going to take a second, I'm going to pop this cover off, and that should have us facing our vapor barrier. Alright, so we got the front panel off, and now we're looking the vapor barrier straight in the face, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you guys. These things suck. And anytime I pull the front panel off and I find that the vapor barrier is straight up missing, or torn out of the center, or has been torn and taped, honestly, I cringe a little bit. I feel that these cars deserve better than that, and if you damage the vapor barrier, in my eyes, replace the vapor barrier. Now, they can be tricky to get because I found that some suppliers don't like to ship them, and that's because the way they get shipped and this adhesive that they use to hold them on is extremely sticky, and they start to get folded over and stick to themselves, and then they're almost unusable before you even get a chance to use them. So I will say that when I have these and they're damaged, or if I know that I'm replacing it, I'll just grab my hand, I'll rip the foam, and I'll rip most of the vapor barrier out, but you're still going to be stuck with your perimeter of where that adhesive is holding that vapor barrier on. Now, I don't want to jump straight to replacing this vapor barrier for this customer, especially since it's still intact and in one piece. And there was a trick that we used to get the adhesive off once we ripped the vapor barrier out. So I'm going to try something new here, and I'm going to try that same trick here on this vapor barrier and see if I can get this one off in one piece to allow us to reuse it. So the trick to getting that vapor barrier adhesive off is using a small putty knife and a MAP gas torch. We're going to take this torch, we're going to heat this knife up a lot. It's going to nearly to where it's glowing red, and that's going to let us get it behind it, and that basically melts the adhesive and lets us just work it off. It works really well, and it's really what we use once we pull the vapor barrier out to get the old adhesive off before we put the new adhesive on. So on this particular job, I did quote the cost of a new vapor barrier, but I also went into this hoping that I would find that it's still fully intact. And I'm going to give this a shot and see if I can get this off in one piece and reuse it, because if I can, I mean, these vapor barriers are a couple $100, so if I can get this one off and reinstalled, I can actually drop that from an estimate, save the customer a couple $100. And in my eyes, it's the same amount of work, because if I were replacing it, I'm still going to have to use this method to get that old adhesive off. So I figure why not give it a shot and see if this works out. So let me get you guys in position and we'll see how this works for me. All right. Get that heated up. I'll just get this peeled back a little so we can get started. And that's going to be tricky to get this started. I think that's going to be the worst part, is finding a good starting point and getting behind the vapor barrier. There we go. Once you get this pulled back a little bit more, we can get back there and work it. And as your putty knife cools off, it loses its effectiveness. So we'll just come back. And you can see that adhesive on there catching fire. This is a stinky job. And you want to be slow and careful. I don't need this whole vapor barrier off to do this conversion, but actually I just spoke with this client last night and we're going to end up doing a biannual service on this car as well. So I'm going to take the whole barrier off to give myself more space and access, because I'll be replacing the receiver dryer for the AC while I'm here. So just one little deviation if you guys are doing this on your car for a conversion versus what I'm doing here. So you guys can see that this is working pretty well. It's coming off nice and clean. We still have our adhesive. We're not tearing it. And I mean, there's no need to rip your vapor barrier out of your car. Just take a little bit of time, be cautious, be careful. You can get this off cleanly. You can save yourself a couple $100. And yeah, just take your time. Easy peasy. So I'm going to work to finish getting this removed, and then once we're done, we'll get the car off the lift so we can actually get to the real work of getting these pedals installed. Well, that worked out fantastic. I was able to get the vapor barrier removed on 3 of the 4 sides. I kept it fully intact, no rips or tears, and we're going to be able to reinstall it, reuse it, and save the customer a couple $100. So you can see I left the bottom attached and I just folded it over, and I have full access to the entire compartment. Again, I removed more of this than you really needed to, but once I got this off, I came across some bad news for myself. So really is what we're facing is I got a peek in here. It's a little dim. See if I can show you, but where our clutch master cylinder bolts on to our pedal box right there. My pedal box, since this is such a late model car, this is a late 2008 car, is not pre-drilled. Now, if you encounter this, Cambio Manuale will actually swap out a pedal box for you. So I could take this pedal box out, I could send it to them. They will send me back one that's pre-drilled, and I can reinstall it back into the car. I'll tell you that they are geographically as far away from me while still being in the United States as possible. They are located down in Florida, and I'm located up in Seattle, Washington. So shipping, transit time, that is not a great option. On top of that, I have all the tools and equipment and experience myself to get that drilled so that way we can deal with it. It just means that I have to go through a little bit of extra work. So here's my plan of attack. Since I mentioned I'm going to be doing a biannual service on this car also, which requires the AC dryer to be replaced, I'm going to have this cowling off. So I'm just going to kind of switch gears right now, and I'm going to get that cowling removed. That's just going to get me more light, more visibility. It'll make it easier to get the brake reservoir out of the way. And I really want to see what I'm working with down there with this pedal box. I just want to get a good visual, because if I can get those holes drilled and tapped without removing the pedal box, that's really a best case scenario. I think I'd rather do that route and deal with cleaning up the metal shavings and working in a tight space versus fully removing the pedal box from the car and getting it done out on the workbench. So really, I'm just taking advantage, since I'm already going to have to remove that component, to just remove it now, make it a little bit easier. Maybe it won't, but nothing's lost, right? We're just taking a pivot. It's going to help me on the service down the road. So you can see that I always mark my wipers so they're up on the windshield. I just threw some blue tape on there. I run a Sharpie line that ensures that I can get the wipers back in the exact same position on reassembly. And getting this panel off is pretty straightforward. You can see all the hardware. The only things to note are these catches. The adjustment of them are, it's kind of important. These are safety catches for crash so the hood doesn't come back. But you want to make sure that they're actually going to fit cleanly in the opening here. If these are grossly misadjusted, it will hit and chip the paint. So that's really one of the keys to doing that. And getting this off is very straightforward. The real trick, or the actually more difficult part, is getting it reinstalled. The key when you're getting this reinstalled is to leave all your hardware loose. So get it in there and get each piece of hardware in its hole and get it started, but leave them loose. Don't tighten them, including these brackets here, and then start tightening everything down to get it in the position. So I think I'm just going to get that popped off real quick, and then we're going to have a better look at our pedal box and what we're going to need to do for this clutch master cylinder. All right, I have updates. You can see that the cowling is off. You also can see that I just doubled down and put some more protection on, because clearly I'm going to be doing more work up here than I anticipated. And really, I like to put this plastic wrap on because as I'm working and moving around, these fender covers tend to rub into the paint. And depending on how well the car is polished, which most of them are usually polished out really nicely, it can end up leaving marks. So it's a little bit of cheap protection. And now let's come over here with the cowling out, and you can see that I've already moved the brake master cylinder out of the way. And down here on the bottom, I have removed the alarm siren. And you can see that I have a lot of great access here now to where our clutch master cylinder needs to go. And from looking at it, I have quite a bit of room. And then assessing this whole pedal box assembly, if I were to take that out, I've already pretty quickly made the conclusion that removing the pedal box assembly and doing a swap, or even removing it just to drill those holes, is way more work than it's worth, and I'm pretty confident that I'll be able to get the holes drilled, tapped, and everything done with it in the car. So what I'm thinking is I have plenty of room down here to get my tooling in to get it drilled. Although I don't have much visibility up here on the top side because of our wiper motor. And I was looking at it, and I don't really want to pull the wiper motor off the linkage here and disconnect that, because I don't really want to lose my adjustments. I'm lazy in that way, where I want to keep this all together in one piece. So I think if I can remove my linkage over here, just these 3 bolts will release this from the cowling. I have the same thing over here with these 3 bolts. Then if I can unbolt my bracket here from the pedal box, I think that I'll be able to drop this down just enough to get these out and kind of wiggle it up and out of the way. And with this removed, I'm going to be able to look straight down on my pedal box, which is going to be key, because I need to make sure that when I'm drilling it, that I'm drilling straight into it, that I'm drilling 90 degrees to that mating flange in both directions, so that way the hardware goes in straight and sits flush. That's very important. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and wrestle this thing out, see how that goes. And I'll probably also go and make a template for what we need to do here on the boss for the master cylinder. If you guys look carefully, struggling to get you in there. If you guys look carefully, you can see that it has little casting impressions right there, one in the center and one down there. And one would presume that those are indications where they would machine it to accept the bore of the master cylinder and the hardware. And rather than make assumptions and just drill into it right away, is what I'll do is I'll spend a little bit of time. I'll take a template off of the actual piece that we need, so then I can make some precise holes, and I know what size hole we need to drill for the cylinder to go through, and I'll have the location for the mounting points. So I'm going to work to get that wiper assembly out. I'm hoping that's going to be pretty easy and straightforward. I'm going to get my template marked and everything, and I'll bring you back once I'm to the point to where I think I'm ready to get those holes drilled, and we'll see how this project goes. All right, our wiper linkage is out, and it came out without any fuss or surprises. The only thing to keep in mind is there's a couple washers underneath the cowling and the linkage over here on either side. So you want to be careful that you keep track of those, and you can get them back in when you reassemble it. But you can see with that out now, we have all kinds of space. All the room that we need to get everything done to this pedal box without removing it. Now, I'll try to get you guys in there. You might notice that I already have some marks up on the pedal box, and I've already center punched my hole location right on the center. So I achieved that by essentially measuring the width and cutting it in half and the height and cutting it in half, and that was my center point. Now I did mention that I was going to make a template of the master cylinder, and I did make that template, and these actual castings here do not line up. So this tells a different story, and from eyeballing this flange, really the center point is the most critical because that hole diameter is really close, and I need to make sure I have enough space all the way around. So I'm establishing the center point of this piece to be the first hole that I drill, and then I'll position the mounting stud holes and drill those afterwards. Now, I did take the car off of the lift so that way I could get on the inside of the car and take a peek what we're working with inside, because I was contemplating if it was going to be worth the effort to try to drill this out from the inside of the car. And there's really not enough space to do so, but I mean, we could maybe move the steering shaft and have some room, but the real problem is, which I don't think it's going to show on camera, is I won't be able to see what angle I'm at, because the angle of the face of the pedal box that's in front of us versus the mounting flange of the master cylinder are on two different angles. And once I would put my socket or my hole saw up in there, I won't be able to see what angle I'm at, and it just seems like the wrong way to go. So with that decision made, we'll come back up here and we're going to drill it from the front side. Like I mentioned, I measured the maximum height. I think it was 80 millimeters. So I cut it in half and did 40 millimeters on each side, center point. This was 40 millimeters width, so I did 20, and that gives me my intersecting point of where I'm going to get this drilled. And to drill it, I'm going to use this 90-degree drill. This gives me plenty of space to get that in there and get it drilled. We're going to drill a small pilot hole first, and then we're going to come back. I'm going to drill it out with an 1.25" hole saw. I will say that small pilot hole, we're going to get that drilled first. That's going to let me take a peek from the back side to make sure I have that centered and the hole's where it needs to be. So we kind of have a little bit of room of error or margin where we can change things if we need to at the pilot hole, although it will be a little difficult, but we're not fully committed versus just jumping straight into it with the hole saw. So I think I've analyzed this enough and kind of assessed it, and I think that's our path forward. I'll get you guys set up, we'll get all the tooling set up, and we're going to start drilling this hole out. Alright, so I put some plastic down in here so that way I can hopefully contain and capture all of my metal shavings and they don't fall down up in the front of the car. And we're just going to use our air drill and do our very best to keep this at the right angle. You can see that I already center punched my hole to give my drill bit a start. Alright, so now we'll take a peek from the inside of the car. Alright, here we are looking at it from the inside after we just drilled that hole, and it to me looks like it's just a skosh off to the left side or the outside of the car. I'll see if I can't correct that, probably by seeing if I can't punch another maybe smaller hole just to the side of that and enlarging it and making it one bigger hole. I'll see if I can get that done before we get the hole saw and start drilling out the main bore for the master cylinder. Okay, so I was successful on getting my hole shifted over to the inside or the right just a hair. So we're looking up from the inside of the car. You can see I put some more plastic down, again, catch the shavings. I don't want them all on the customer's carpet. But I was able to get it shifted over, and I obviously drilled the hole to be a little bit larger, but it is still smaller than the pilot drill on our hole saw, so that way it's still going to sit tight in there while we drill it out. And you can see where it has the embossment or in the casting where the original hole should be, so we're pretty well centered in that. And once we come back through with that 1.25" hole saw, we're pretty much going to be in the center of that and pretty much right where it needs to be. So we have all this out of the way. Now it's time to get back up there, get a hole saw ready to go, and drill this thing out. So I'm just trying to get my hole saw in here positioned. I'm really fighting this upper section of the cowl to get this in straight, and also my trigger is back here on the back side. It would be a lot better if I had a shorter hole saw, but I don't. Right there. So we'll see if we can't control the speed and get this started. Good. There we go. Feels pretty good. We'll come back and get this all cleaned up because we're also going to need to do something about this hex pattern or square pattern that's on it, because that's not going to let our master sit flat. So we're going to have to shave that off anyway. So there's going to be some cleanup when we're done. That's pretty good. And minimized our mess. Let's get our master and see how we fit. Right there, on the money. So now I need to get my holes for the mounting bolts marked and drilled and tapped. So I just mentioned that I'm going to have to do something about this cast-in pattern on the front side because the master is not going to be able to sit flush with that there. Well, I was holding my template up so I can get an idea of where I need to get my mounting holes, and I can tell that those irregular castings are really going to make it difficult for me to get a true center mark on my holes, where basically when I'm trying to drill those holes, I'm going to be fighting all this casting flash that's out here. I really need this to be a true flat surface, so that way I have nothing obstructing the mounting holes, so I can get those properly centered, drilled, and tapped. So since I was going to do something about that anyways, I'm going to use my die grinder. I have an 80 grit disc on it. I'm just going to lightly knock those off. And then I'll come back and I have a coarse and a finer Scotch-Brite that I'll come back after the 80 grit disc. This is going to really smooth it out and make it look a lot nicer, not like it's just been ground on. And I'm going to get that taken care of real quick, and then I'm going to work to get the holes located for the master. I have some transfer punches that I'll use, so I'll be holding the master in place, positioning in the transfer punch, and then making those marks. So I'll get all that done, bring you guys right back, and show you how it turns out. Alright, so here's where we're at. We can see that I cleaned up the face of the mounting flange and it looks a whole lot better, and it's going to let that master sit flush on there without any problems. I did hold the master up there and use a transfer punch to make the mark for my upper hole. I got that drilled out and I used a 17/64 drill bit to drill it. The hardware to install this is 8 by 1.25, so that drill bit is going to be the right size for me to run my tap through. You can see I use these small adapters to put my tap onto a ratchet so I don't have to use the classic T-handle. It's really going to help with the space that I have in there to get this in there and slowly and very controlled to get those holes tapped. I will be using some aluminum cutting fluid on my tap to get that in there. And here's the transfer punch that I was talking about with our master. So to locate the hole, I actually had this positioned up in there. I kind of just had it sitting up there where I wanted to. You can see that it's upside down. I can't do it because I don't have two hands right now, but I put my transfer punch, there we go, in there. I positioned it based on the outside of the casting. I'm using my finger to feel where I wanted it. I took a hammer and tapped on my transfer punch, which leaves a small dimple. Then I used my normal punch to get a good starter, punched it, drilled out a pilot hole, and drilled out my main hole. So we got that done for the top bolt. I'm going to get that tapped so that way I can take this master, take my transfer punch out, so I can flip it upright. Then I can bolt this in position with the upper bolt, and then I'll be able to put my transfer punch down here on the bottom and do the same thing. Make a transfer mark, take it out, punch it, drill it, tap it, and we should be set. You can see here at the casting with this flange right here, there's really no room to get my transfer punch in, so I have to flip it upside down, and fortunately the mounting locations in relation to the cylinder are symmetrical. So I'm going to take a couple minutes to get that upper hole tapped, get my bottom hole drilled, or located, drilled, and then tapped. And once I get that done, I can come through here and clean up all the aluminum, the dust, and the shavings, and we'll be able to bolt this in and move on with our project. All right, so we've recovered from that detour and we now have the pedal box ready to accept the clutch master cylinder. So all three holes are drilled and our two mounting bolt holes are drilled and tapped. And you can see that it came out pretty good, looks real nice. And we have the front mounting flange smooth, so that way it's going to sit flush up on there. And I think now that I have that taken care of, I'm actually going to work to just get this installed. I'm going to leave the lines off. We will Loctite the bolts. And I probably will go through and get our wiper motor and linkage all reassembled. I may or may not put in the siren depending on how much space it gives me. And I'm probably going to leave the reservoir over here off to the side because you can see really clear. This is the nipple that we're going to tie off to that's going to feed into our clutch master cylinder. And that is the reason why I'm going to leave this laying off to the side, because I won't have any lines hooked up yet and I don't really want to open the system, connect it, and have the potential for brake fluid to, leak out and make a mess everywhere. So I'm probably going to work to install the master and just leave everything up here as is. And then once I'm fully done with the conversion and we run our hydraulic line to the back, I'll come up here and finish up the lines and make those connections and mount our reservoir as it should be. Now I am going to make a note. I am not excited about how I have that reservoir off to the side. 430s had a lot of problems with getting air into the brakes, causing a lot of issues with the brake pedal, and I would say that I'm hypersensitive to that, especially when I'm doing a brake bleed or a brake flush on these cars. So the fact that I have that reservoir turned off to its side that way, I have all the fluid kind of down on the side and the inlet lines going to the master are exposed to air. I don't really like that I had to do that whatsoever. The only peace of mind that I have with that is I know that I'll be doing a brake flush on this car afterwards as part of the 2-year service. Now I will be using a Leonardo tester to activate the ABS control unit to run through the brake bleed cycle when I do my brake flush. So knowing that I'm going to be doing that at the tail end of the repairs just gives me a peace of mind where I'm not overly worried about it. My recommendation would be if you're doing this in your car and you actually have your reservoir turned like that, I mean, it's cheap insurance to do a brake flush. It's a safety item. I'd rather not have that doubt in my mind and be sure. So I would recommend that you do it. Or find a way to get this done where you don't have to rotate the reservoir like I did. I just felt that that was important to note because there was several bulletins on 430s, specifically Scuderias, about the brake booster, the master cylinder, and also the procedure that Ferrari gives us for the brake bleed. So I feel that it's important to note and it is one thing that I was aware of when I was doing it. I was able to get the wiper motor and linkage installed with no problems. It actually really wasn't too bad. You can see that the clutch master is installed, and I have just enough room on those banjo bolts for when we put the lines in. I'll be able to get a wrench in there and get them tightened up. For now, we're just going to leave the brake fluid reservoir off to the side till we get those lines in. And like I mentioned, we're going to wait until we have the car back on the lift, the run the line on the front, back to the transmission. So kind of since we're in the mode of drilling holes and modifying things, I figured the next step that I would tackle is our brake pedal. So you can already see that I've taken the seats out of the car, and I have to do some additional work to the car unrelated to this conversion, where I'm going to be pulling the back panel to get to the front of the engine, and I need to do some diagnosis on an oil leak. So I figured it's going to be far easier for me just to remove the seats and not have to work around them. So with those out of the way, I can drop you guys in here, and bear with me. This is going to be pretty tricky to get a camera up in here and show you guys what I'm talking about. But we're going to have to take the brake pedal out. We've already discussed it. I'm going to choose to cut the brake pedal down, so I'm going to have to make a cut all the way down here to get rid of this side of the brake pedal. Also, we need to make room for our clutch pedal. So here's what we need to do down here. There's this small 10 mil bolt up here that threads through the pedal box into the shaft. That retains this entire shaft. I need to remove this ECU right here. This is our suspension ECU. It's held in with two 8mm bolts. Once I take that out and move it out of the way, I have room to move my shaft inward. I will take out our shaft retaining bolt that we just talked about. I also need to get back here and take this 13 mil off the back of our brake pedal, and then I'll be able to slide my shaft through. I'll have the brake pedal free. We can work on it on the outside of the car, and also we can take out this nylon sleeve because that's where our clutch pedal is going to go. Space is real tight in here, guys. I don't honestly think it's feasible for me to get a camera in here and record it as I'm doing that work. So I'm just going to pop this stuff off like I described. If anything changes, I'll definitely talk about it on the way back, but I'm going to work to get this brake pedal out of the car. All right, we're making some progress. We have the brake pedal out, and I will say for the most part it came out pretty much like I anticipated, although I will say that this plastic sleeve or Teflon sleeve, getting that out, I had a limitation on how far I can move the shaft to the inside or to the right, and it made it tight to get this out because the shaft was still sticking in it just a little bit. But with a little bit of force, I was able to pop this out and slide it off. And I had concerns with, well, if that was hard to get off, is the new clutch pedal going to be difficult to get back in? But fortunately, our new clutch pedal is a lot thinner. And the reason why it's thinner is because we actually have this bracket that's going to sit in there. Actually, I think it's going to sit like this for the clutch position sensor. So this bracket here and the clutch pedal equals the same distance as this, but since they're separate, it's going to make it a lot easier to get all that slid back in and reassembled. So we have them sitting here on the bench. We have our new Cambio Manuale clutch pedal, our factory brake pedal. We need to cut down our brake pedal so it mimics or resembles a factory manual car brake pedal. And in order to do so, we're basically going to cut this left side off with this 2 rows of dimples. Now, to get this marked out to cut it, I was doing some measuring and looking, and I noticed that I am about 4.5mm in between dimple to dimple. And if I go to the edge of my dimple to the outside edge, it's again 4.5mm. And comparing that to the Cambio Manuale, unsurprisingly, it's exactly the same. So that's essentially telling me to make this cut down here and keep the same amount of reveal or space here so it looks factory and not cut too close to this row of dimples. I basically need to make my cut come down and just kiss the edge of these dimples. So I'm going to cut it a little wide so that way I can come back and file it and dress it and make it clean. I don't want to cut in here at all because it's going to be too narrow at that point. So I'm going to get this marked out so that way I can cut it, and I'm going to take full advantage of my bandsaw back there and use that to cut it because that is going to be the quickest and easiest, and I'll have the most control using that method. So I'm going to get my cut line on this brake pedal, then we're going to take it over to the bandsaw and get it cut. just like that, we have our pedal cut down, pretty simple. And you'll notice that I cut right through the edge of that middle row or second row of dimples. And if we look at our pedal, you can still see that there's a little bit of it left on there on those dimples. A little bit more on the bottom than there is on the top. Now I wanted to do that on purpose because even though that bandsaw does cut nice, it still leaves a bit of a jagged cut. So I'm going to come back through just a hand file. I'm going to work this edge to smooth it out, and by the time it's smoothed out, I should have all these dimples worked off. I can make that small correction with the hand file to bring this in more than the top side so it's square. And then I'll just work gently around the edges. And again, I don't want to use any power tools. I'm just going to use hand tools and work this edge, bevel this edge, and bevel the corners to make it match our new clutch pedal and the other sides of this pedal. I'm going to get to working on that, and I'll bring you guys back here once we're all finished up. Alright, there's our finished product. We have our pedal cut down, we have all our corners filed and beveled, and I just put a slight bevel on the edge just to break it a little bit, and you can see that it came out pretty nicely. I just took a piece of very coarse Scotch-Brite and pretty much scuffed the side of it. I didn't want it to get too smooth and too shiny because I wanted it to look natural. As you can see, these kind of have that sand cast finish. No easy way to duplicate that, but when it's installed in the car, it's going to look fantastic. And we can see compared to the Cambio Manuale pedal, looks great. Came out good. So I have everything laid out here, how it gets installed in the car. This is the factory spacer or shim that sat here on this side for the brake pedal to the pedal box, and then we had that nylon sleeve right here. We're not going to be using that nylon sleeve, and these are shims that come with the Cambio Manuale kit, and we're going to be reinstalling those as needed. So I'm not sure if this shim needs to go back in or not. It doesn't really call out anything in the instructions. So I'm going to install it with the shims they get, and then I'm just going to assess if I have a gap in lateral movement in the pedals. Then I'll come back and add that shim if it needs it. But for now, I'm just going to install the new hardware. Now I've lubed all of them. I just used some Siliglide on it to get them lubricated up. I got the inside pivots of our pedals all lubricated. You can see I have this clutch return spring on, which they definitely recommend to install it in this orientation before you put the pedal in the car. And one more thing, or I should say a small development last night that I found after I modified the pedal and finished filming, is there's the rubber boot that goes on the backside of the clutch master cylinder, and I installed the clutch master cylinder without that rubber boot. And I was going to install it from the inside of the car, but once I got under here and looked at the master cylinder and our opening, you can see that rubber boot there. There was no way I was going to get that rubber boot installed, especially since it kind of has a raised lip around the outside that sits in a groove on the clutch master cylinder. So I ended up taking the clutch master cylinder back out of the car, installing that rubber boot, but then I ran into a new problem where the hole that we drilled in the pedal box, which I used a 1.25" hole saw, was not large enough. So I had to come back, use my Dremel, enlarge that hole, make it big enough for that to slide through, and it was still pretty tight. So I did end up putting a little bit of the Siliglide on the outside of that rubber boot, and I was able to slide it all the way in and get that reinstalled. So if you're doing a modification to your pedal box like I am, you're definitely going to want to pay attention to that, because it's in that pocket from the inside. You're not really going to be able to get that rubber boot back on. It's definitely install it on the master cylinder and then push it in through the back side. I will say that that rubber boot comes pre-installed on the clutch master cylinder. I had removed it while I was making my templates, so maybe a bit of a self-induced problem there. One more thing also I just realized that I need to mention is this ear right here. Since my pedal box was not modified with the hole for a clutch master cylinder, this was also not drilled with a hole for a clutch return spring, so that was pretty simple. I just came in here with my 90-degree drill and drilled that hole out. I did have to loosen our mounting bolts right here for my brake booster, push it forward so I could get this out of the way for my drill to get in there and get it drilled. But that wasn't a huge hurdle to overcome. It just took a little bit more time to get me sorted. So I think really, if you're going into this and doing this conversion on your car, I would definitely go ahead of time and check and see if you have that pedal box or not, and make the decision. Do you want to get one from Cambio Manuale, or do you want to go through the steps that I use to modify this pedal box? I will say that I spent the better part of a day essentially getting that pedal box modified and all the different things and working around it. Maybe it would have been quicker if I had one on hand and I just was unbolting it and reinstalling it. Hard to say. Now that I have gone through and modified that box, if I encounter another one, I'll just modify it again, and I'm confident I'll be able to work through it much quicker. So, we're fully up to speed there. Just like getting the pedals out, I'm going to hop in the car. I'm going to work to get all the pedals reinstalled. I'm going to work to get them adjusted. Space is so tight, I'm not going to try to record that. Once they're in and installed, I'll bring you guys back. We'll touch on the key talking points of what I discovered during the process, what I found out, and yeah, let's see how this goes. There we have it. We now have a clutch pedal installed, and I have all the hardware in here fully reinstalled, bolted back down. You can see our suspension ECU is back up into the car. Brake pedals fully installed, bolted up to the master cylinder there. And as for the spacers, I did not use the factory spacer. I used all of the 4 metal shims that came with the Dr. S kit and the 2 nylon washers. That filled up all the space that I had to get my shaft installed, so there's no lateral play with anything. One thing to note, ran into another problem since our pedal box wasn't modified, and that's right up here with our pedal travel limit, and this limits the upward travel of the pedal, and that hole in this boss was not drilled and tapped. So I discovered that once I already had this pedal assembly installed and the shaft already pushed back through. I wasn't too eager to take the pedals back out. On the back side of the clutch pedal, you can't really see it with the camera, that is the down travel limit stop, and it's just a 13mm bolt with a jam nut. I was able to take that bolt and jam nut out, and that let me push the pedal all the way down with no limitation, which then over here allowed the boss on the pedal to clear the boss on the pedal box assembly, enough for me to drill it and tap it and get that resolved. So it wasn't a big deal. I didn't really have to backtrack too much, but I did get that taken care of. And the only thing that I can say that I deviated on from the instructions with Cambio Manuale, which is what we talked about before I put this pedal in, was the orientation of the spring. I ended up flipping it around because it made it a lot easier for me to get the bottom hooked onto the boss down there. Which actually, I don't know if I mentioned that. I had to drill that hole in that boss as well. So that was the modifications I had to make. I had to drill the hole here. I had to drill for this jam nut up there. And obviously all the hardware for the master cylinder. So there was quite a few things we had to change. But to get that spring wrapped around that boss in the bottom, the way it was originally on, I was trying to hook it around over here and do all the work on this side. Once I flipped the spring around, which actually was very easy to get it on and off with everything assembled in the car, I then had all of this working room over here to work to get the spring on, and it made it wildly easier. So that is my recommended orientation of the spring. And I have my pedal travel set and adjusted for all the way down and all the way up. And to adjust the pedal travel in the up position, we match it with our existing brake pedal, and then we measure from basically the plane of the brake pedal to the plane of the clutch pedal in the all the way down position. And it was targeting like 120 millimeters. Basically, I had it all the way down to where it starts hitting the carpet. That was just a little bit shy of what the factory recommends on the specification, but I rather have it stop rather than just hitting the carpet. So we made those adjustments there. That is done. I have my clutch linkage all hooked up, and now I just want to be careful that I don't operate the pedal until I get fluid in it. And the only adjustment I'll have left is once I have the system bled and fluid in it, I'll need to adjust the rod to the clevis right here to make sure I don't have any free play on the pedal and there's no dead spot. So when we're actuating the clutch, it's actuating the master cylinder. Okay, while we're still under the dash, I'll give you guys one little tip that'll help when you're getting this shaft put back in. Now there's a set screw over here that goes through the pedal box and through the shaft, so that way the shaft does not rotate. Our bracket here for the clutch position sensor also has a set screw that goes through the shaft, so the shaft doesn't rotate. Getting that set screw in can be difficult because you have to line it up with the shaft, and you don't have a good way to actually rotate the shaft because there's pretty much no protrusion on either end of the castings. What I ended up doing is I took this clutch position sensor all the way out, and I had a lot of room to rotate this bracket for the sensor. I rotated it around until I got it lined up with the threads for the hole. I have a small bolt that I actually shaved down and made it to a point and kind of shaved the threads off so it slides in nicely. I did that on the last 430 that I had in the shop that was converted, because I actually found that the upper retaining bolt wasn't in the clutch shaft and the shaft was sliding out. But I used that to line the shaft up and the hole in the shaft to this bracket, and then I installed the jam nut on the bracket. I then was able to grab this bracket, and that allowed me to rotate the shaft so I could get it positioned to get our jam nut in through the pedal box through the shaft. So using this bracket actually gave me a good point to rotate the shaft and help position everything, and it made it a lot easier. And then once I had everything done, then I reinstalled the clutch position sensor and adjusted it. So now that the shaft is pinned to the pedal box, this bracket doesn't move at all. It stays locked in position, but it does make a great lever to help out getting that shaft buttoned up. So here's that bolt that I was talking about that I made on the previous converted 430 that I found the loose clutch shaft on. And you can see that I just basically tapered the very end of it, but I also knocked some of the threads off towards the end so that way it would help slide in a little bit better. And really that came in pretty key on getting my clutch position sensor located to the shaft and that bolt end, which then made the rest of it a lot easier. And on the car that I actually made that for, I was actually using that bolt to get the entire shaft pinned to the pedal box. And on that car, the shaft had slid out actually, probably 3/4 of an inch. So I pushed the shaft back in, but it rotated and my hole was no longer aligned, although it was positioned depth-wise correctly. So I took that bolt, I set it in, and it was able to get just barely started in the hole in the shaft. And then I used a pry bar. I was able to get the pry bar locked in on the pedal box and pushed down on the bolt, which then rotated my shaft in position, lined everything up, and allowed me to get the hardware in. So it worked really great. Fortunately, I kept it around and it paid off again. Well, guys, find ourselves in a bit of a predicament here. So the truth of the matter is, it's actually a couple weeks down the road. As you can tell, the 456 is actually back on the lift, and it's been my main focus for the last couple weeks. 430 projects finished, completed, done, and back with the client. So you might be wondering, why are we here talking about being in a predicament? Well, since it's so far after the fact, I finally just got to completing the edit of this video, working through this conversion. And I'll say that when I set out to film the conversion, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it in one video or two videos. And I ended up filming it as if it was one video, and I thought that I was going to be able to make it work. Well, I can tell you that yesterday I just finished the final edit on the video, and we are looking at a video, it's right here in front of us, that ended up being 3 hours and 2 minutes long. And I will say that when I go through and edit a video, I honestly do not target a certain time frame. I try to be mindful and not make them too long, but honestly, my main goal and objective is to cover all the work and the technical info that I want to get conveyed in the video, and wherever the length of the video falls at, that's where it falls at. So this is my dilemma. I honestly feel that the 3-hour video is probably just a little bit too long, and I think we're better off cutting this video and making it into 2 parts, so a part 1 and a part 2 of the conversion. So with that, I think we're going to pretty much wrap this one up for today and consider this part 1. And luckily for you guys, since I already have everything edited, next week you're going to be seeing part 2, where we're going to cover the installation of the shift tower, shifter, all of the work that we need to handle for the interior trim, all of our shift cables. I'm going to walk you guys through the E-Diff bleed and show you some tricks of setting your fluid level and getting the clutch bled, and really what we're all here for, the final product, the final road test, getting the car out on the road, experiencing it. And I almost forgot all the electrical. We're going to cover that too. So there's a lot of good information in the second half of this video, a lot of great tips and tricks. So definitely stay tuned, keep an eye on the channel. It's going to be out 1 week from this video. As for now, guys, you know the drill. I appreciate the support. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Also, be sure to hit the hype button, see how that works out for us. It's a new feature that YouTube's pushing. And well, as always, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.